Now, a month ago today, Tony Walker was appointed Chief Executive of Ambulance Victoria. He'd been acting in the job for some 18 months. He's got a long history as a paramedic, 30 years, I think, as a paramedic. He's a micro officer, still works on the road occasionally to keep in touch, keep on the tools. Associate Professor Tony Walker, good morning.
Morning, Neil.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Why do you still go out on the road?
It's important we keep connected. I still love engaging with patients and working with our crews, and it's very easy to get caught up in the bureaucracy and the other things and actually lose sight of why we're all here. So getting out and spending a day with our crews, which I do at least once a month, allows me to engage with them and also hear the issues they're facing.
Are you hands-on when you go out? Do you actually work as a paramedic, or are you just an observer?
I'll have hands-on. They'll always try and get me to do something. I'm certainly not as sharp as they would be today, given I haven't been practicing in that way for a number of years. But no, I'll get out there and get my hands dirty, but certainly under the direct support of the crews that are there.
The last shift you were on, what happened?
The last one I did actually up at Shepparton. It was a great day. We ran out with one of our micro paramedics up there, and the first job of the day, we treated a 64-year-old bus driver who was having a heart attack outside of Shepparton, about 30 minutes out of Shep, and we're able to administer a new clot-busting drug to him. So he literally had his heart attack turned around, reversed at the point of a needle, and is doing really well. It's just, again, that's the sort of stuff I can see out there when I'm working with our crews, what's going on, and get a chance to actually see what's working and what's not.
We hear a lot about an increasing danger for paramedics and violence. Have you come across that at all?
I haven't personally, but certainly I see every violent incident that occurs to our paramedics, all the reports around it, and every day, at least on average every day, a paramedic is being assaulted. On the weekend, I've had two of our crews assaulted, both in emergency departments and spat at.
Okay?
They're fine, they're being supported, but it is an ongoing issue for us. For whatever reason, particularly the community with drug and alcohol, particularly, it's a real risk for our paramedics.
How often do you get injuries from that?
I would suggest that probably every third or fourth incident that we get, there'll be a level of injury. Now, it might just be something minor, but nevertheless, these are people who come to work every day to do their job and expect to go home well and safe. And they're as much as we're trying hard to make it as safe as practicable, it is a risky environment out there for them.
Well, about 30 years ago, you started on the job?
That's right, 30 years.
Was it happening then?
There was violence, always been violence, but it's worse today. Things like ICE make it worse. There seems to be less respect for the uniform across all services than maybe I experienced when I started in the job. It is an issue.
You have one of your own children's a paramedic, are they?
I do. I have a son who's a paramedic. Yeah, he's been in for about 4 years now, and really loves it. Really, and I'm people have often said to me, "Would you recommend for your family to be paramedics?" I would. I think it's one of the best jobs in the world.
Despite those dangers,
I think it's about the good outweighs the bad. There is always a risky environment out there, but I think the reality of the good things you can do in this job far outweigh that.
And the stresses, we've talked about suicide rates in the past.
We have. It's a big issue for us. I came and spoke about the work we're doing at Beyond Blue a month or so ago, but the stress out there of the job, the accumulation of fatigue and other issues really impact on our workforce.
There's a report on Four Corners tonight about police and some ambulance officers complaining about the way their claims for PTSD or psychological damage are being handled, that it's been a bit too brutal through the insurance companies. Do you think they've got a case?
Oh, look, I think there are issues there. Certainly, I've had paramedics raise it with me. It is often difficult. When you break your leg, it's very easy to see a broken leg. When you're dealing with mental health or other issues, it can be more complex. So it certainly has been raised with me as an issue.
Are we sensitive enough to it? That's what I'm sensitive enough to people doing this job suffering that way.
It's a good question. I think we are internally. I think we understand it, but I think it's harder for other people outside of the organisation to understand just what sort of stressors paramedics are being exposed to.
But you'd hope if I'm a paramedic or a police officer or a firey and I have significant PTSD, I'll get support from the organisation rather than having as the examples they're talking about. We've talked, this is in the police area, I've talked about this before, about the insurance company putting spies on you to see whether you're genuine.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we do hope that people take on merit what our paramedics are telling them and that they are properly supported. We're certainly doing everything we can internally to make it better for our paramedics and ideally preventing these things occurring rather than having to deal with them at the end when these things occur.
Now, response time's always a hot issue and you're still well off target. Some figures released today. Your target is 85% of code 1, which is the top line emergency call, in 15 minutes. You're still well short of that?
we haven't hit that target, but we have seen improvement. So I look at the last, we've seen incremental improvement every year over the last 3 years. We just had our figures released actually today, which showed that we've had almost a 1% improvement on the previous year. And a lot of that's driven by increasing demand in the community. Our demand for emergency care is probably up about 6%. And a lot of that isn't emergency work. A lot of it is work that might be better treated by local GPs or with advice.
So when you say it's up 6%, they're the calls, not the genuine emergencies.
They're up the 6%, but our emergency calls are up about 4%. So
why?
Part of it is around, I think, sometimes the resilience of the community. People don't know where to go, and so we're the easiest port of call. But we're also getting called, and there's an article in the Herald Sun today about we're getting called for things, the worried well, people who just are calling us or for ridiculous things, that 1 in 5 of our calls don't actually require an emergency ambulance, and we're better managing those by diverting to different services.
What's the silliest reason you've seen for calling an ambulance?
Someone calls because a cat scratched them. We've got situations where someone's said their hands are blue because of the, and it turns out to be dye from their genes. Now we take each of these cases on merit, but we're interrogating them much better at the point of call now, and if they don't need an emergency ambulance, we won't send one. We'll better give them advice or match them to another service.
Yeah, but if somebody rings and says their hands are blue, you might think you should turn up.
Well, that's historically what we would do is just naturally respond to an emergency ambulance. Now we'll spend more time through our secondary triage area actually asking more information to understand what's going on.
Have you washed your jeans recently?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we do that, we can really differentiate whether it's a real emergency or something that's better managed by just advice over the phone or referring them to the GP.
But some of these are just sheer stupidity. My husband won't stop snoring. I need to get home from a party. I mean, that's just stupidity, isn't it?
It is. And we're managing those now through not sending an ambulance, when historically our approach was everyone who called 000 got an ambulance. Now, that's not necessary. We want to make sure ambulances are available for those people in the community that really need it.
18 seconds slower for code 1 compared to the same quarter last year. Is that a concern?
Yeah, we see variability across quarters. So obviously it is a concern for me anytime we don't see improvement all the time. But I look at our whole year, we've seen a 1%, almost 1% improvement. A lot of that's driven by the variability around conditions. So, for example, we've come into a much wetter, colder winter that starts seeing greater level of respiratory problems. So we do see variability, but I think overall we're seeing improvement in our performance. But we've got a way to go, and we're constantly focusing on that through our reform work at the moment.
What about code 2, level 2 calls? The response there is a minute slower than last year.
Yeah, it has been. In the basis, we've been focusing our available services on the more sicker patients. Some of those less sick patients have to wait. Our work at the moment around our reforms that we're underway are now better using the non-emergency sector to allow us to respond to those calls more quickly. So rather than waiting for an emergency ambulance, which might take some time, through our secondary triage area, we can now match them to a non-emergency ambulance and they get a better level of service.
We read and whinge about the traffic endlessly. Is that causing a problem?
It is. Traffic is one of our biggest issues when we look at impact on performance at the moment, particularly around inner city, peak hours. And that is a challenge for us, and particularly when we have crews from out of metropolitan Melbourne in town trying to get back to their areas to provide a response, it can be a problem.
Calls for Tony Walker, if you'd like, the head of the ambulance service, 96900 693 13 13 32. We'll take a quick break. What about people ignoring? We've talked about this before too. And the more the traffic's a problem, the more you rely on your sirens and lights and everything to get through. Are people still ignoring them?
No, they are. I'm very frustrated. Feedback from our crews who people just do stupid things. All people need to do is move to the left, but we have people that are they freeze, and we can't predict what they're going to do. So it can be a problem for us. But
so it's stupid or deliberate?
Well,
it's only an ambo. No.
My sense is it's not deliberate. My sense is most times it's just people aren't properly trained to know what to do.
Calls for Associate Professor Tony Walker in a moment.